Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Not D&D, which is brought to you by EN Live, which is part of EN World, the leading tabletop news and review site. I'm your host, Jessica, and with me this week, I have Sophie from Evil Hat Productions. Sophie, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Could you give us... So this week, we're going to be all talking about the Fate core system. But could you give us, Sophie, a little introduction to what you do at Evil Hat Productions?
I started by writing, and then I did for a few years some project management on a number of books that you've seen. And now for the duration of the pandemic, more or less, I've been working on the digital aspect, including, of course, posting the PDFs to DriveThruRPG and itch.io, but more importantly, creating modules on virtual tabletops for Roll20 and facilitating for other platforms as well that are less well known.
Amazing. So making sure people can play the games online, which is the important bit, really.
Yes, and it's fun because it's creative. I get to do what I want with the module to make it look pleasant and useful.
Fantastic. Well, we're all very excited to hear. And thank you for coming on, because we know you're very busy, because Evil Hat did very well at the Ennies, lots of awards. So congratulations to you and the whole team at Evil Hat of that. Like I said, I'll be talking about, we're talking about the Fate core system here. Yes, I've got all the books there, that was the awards. So we're talking about the Fate core system. If you are watching live and you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments and we will answer them live on the show for you, for myself or Sophie, about the system here. But before we get into talking about the game, I always start by kind of talking about the guest's background. So, Sophie, what was the first tabletop RPG you remember playing?
It was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons in 1982, 3.
Oh, wow. So you've been playing games for a long time.
Yes.
Amazing. And Dungeons and Dragons is such a classic to start on. So many people do. But now you play and run so many different games. So what was that journey like, to being somebody that plays and enjoys games to somebody that, works in the industry doing all the things you do?
Well, for the longest time, it was just a hobby. When I started, it was at the club at the engineering department of University of Montreal, and so every week, engineering departments produce a lot of geeks, so it was a well-attended club. So I think it was Thursdays, we would have some 40 to 60 of us. So there was a lot of games to try. So immediately after, I got to try Middle-earth role-playing, 007, Top Secret, Traveler, all of those. So I've never had a single game in mind. So I've always been interested in a lot of games. And in there were some big strides in the 80s and 90s, and around 2000 we started getting indie games that also brought a fresh look. So I've always enjoyed the cross-pollination between different games.
Well, same. That's why I started doing this show, really, to get people talking about all these amazing games. But sorry, you're saying, so how did you start working professionally in the industry like you do now?
Well, largely thanks to the support to fandom that the internet started providing, made us able to know one another from across the world, and start doing things like sharing maybe some play aid you created, and then blogging, and also I volunteered for, I still do, for conventions, some key conventions, and so that got me to know a lot of people. So when I approached Evil Hat with an idea for something to do with the recently published new version of Fate at the time in
Yeah,
2013. They said, well, that doesn't quite fit, but we have another idea and you'd be perfect for that. So
amazing.
that's how I
Mhm.
started doing professional work. And then I wrote for some other publishers as well. And the relationship with Evil Hat has been great. So I've done a lot of things with them and for them.
Oh yeah, what sort of things have you done at Evil Hat? You briefly mentioned in the intro a bit, but if you could tell us a
Yeah.
bit more about that.
Well, I'm in a pinch, I'll help I'm able to help on a lot of things,
Hmm.
from, proofreading, the occasional little editing, the project management skills,
Hmm.
in which I had formal training.
Hmm.
Um, and I also have a good eye for at least coming up with the mock-up of a visual concept, and then
Hmm.
pros like Fred Hicks, or now we use other layout artists, and the one
Hmm.
currently that I work most with is Chris Viana from Brazil,
Hmm.
and so they're able to take these and make them pretty.
Yes, yes, an important skill definitely in tabletop RPGs for sure. So talking a little bit about kind of Fate, as you mentioned. So you joined, started working with Evil Hat in 2013 when the system, was kind of regenerated, but it kind of started in the early kind of 2000s. And the main thing, if you could give people a summary about what is the Fate core system, how would you describe it to people?
Well, the current version is, I would say, it's a system that's fine tuned to take the story you're telling, and as you need it, use mechanical bits to make it in a work in a more structured way than just a general agreement. Yeah, this is what the story should do. So
Mm-hmm.
if you have met some of the very open-ended games, like Universalis, or yeah, Fall of Magic, this sort of very narrative game, they're fun, but they can be difficult for some types of players because they don't really give you an answer for who has the most success in this situation. How does the story unfold from there? So this Fate Core is a good transition for people who come from a much more structured background. But instead of making the numbers on the character sheet the primary thing, and then after you've rolled, explaining it in narrative terms, it's a
Mm-hmm.
toolbox to take your narrative impetus and mechanize it gently so that it actually makes sense in numbers.
Definitely, I love the sound of that. One of the things when Fate was one of the games I started playing when I first started playing role playing games, which was close to 15 years ago now. So it was a system I started on, and one of the things that interested me about it is the dice are very different from normal ones. I have some here.
Mhm.
So they are kind of six-sided dice with like pluses and minuses on. And they were called, and for the longest time, people referred to them as fudge dice, and I didn't know why. So could you explain, Sophie, why in Fate these are called fudge dice, and how we use them in the game?
Well, Fudge was a game created earlier, which used those dice that have two
Mm-hmm.
pluses, two minuses, and two blank faces, or they
Mm-hmm.
may be marked with a symbol, but they're worth zero.
Mm-hmm.
And with the idea that whenever you rolled against with a skill or against a difficulty, on average, the expected average value would be plus zero. So that if you had a skill that was rated at, I don't know, plus four, you had a reasonable expectation that on average you would probably do decently well against a difficulty
Mhm.
of +3 and have trouble versus a +7. So that was the basic statistical idea.
Mhm.
And the original Fate was not published, was not shared with the general public, but then the version 2.0 was shared as a freebie online, and it was presented as a way to use Fudge in a more narrative way, in a more
Mhm.
story driven way.
One
And
of
that's what was behind the
mhm.
as you mentioned, Spirit of the Century, and later on the Dresden Files.
Yeah, the Dresden Files is where I kind of jumped in and saw it because I'm a fan of the books, and I've got to say, the book, the current Dresden File book as well that's out, really is great for fans of that system. It's not just, sometimes you get RPGs where the theme's kind of put on and it's fine, but this has been really lovingly made. So people that wrote that knew Dresden as well, and it blends so well with the system, and it's such a lovely book. So I have a lot of praise for that. But talking about one of the things I really love about the system is the way there's group dynamics and about character generation. Because for me, one of the things I love about role-playing games is the interaction between different characters and those relationship dynamics. And Fate is a fantastic system for building them. So Sophie, could you talk us through how character gen works in Fate?
Well, it's assumed that most Fate games, or at least campaigns, will start with a group agreeing on the setting and building the setting as they go, and
Mm-hmm.
as part of that, building their characters, so they'll work within the setting, so that you'll be connected to important characters, or characters become important because they're connected to your player character, and the player characters have relationships between them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that part is considered play. It's not you go home and make a character by yourself,
Yeah.
and then share it with the group, and then the poor GM tries to make
Stitch
sense
it.
of it. Yes, you all meet in a tavern.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, for us, character creation is play.
Mm-hmm.
And so you will have sometimes prompts like questions in the base Fate. There's usually the one of the key concept is aspects, and
Mm-hmm.
aspects are little descriptors about your character, but also about other elements in the game. Your character starts with at least two aspects, and from the start, you can have up to five aspects by default.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the first is, if people squint, they can probably read the gray titles in the first two boxes. The first is your high concept, so it's your
Mm-hmm.
character in a nutshell, such as blind swashbuckler, or
Wonderful.
um, beleaguered banker,
Mm-hmm.
fleeing justice. Although that might get into the trouble, because the second one is something that it's still true, and you can still use it for a lot of things, but the primary thing you're going to use it for is getting in trouble and earning some of the currency of fate points that will help you do some extraordinary things later.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to be something that gets you in trouble.
Yeah.
uh, and then the next three, depending on the flavor of fate, whether it's Dresden Files, or Atomic Robo, or and so forth, they may
Mm-hmm.
have different description or requirements. But in the base core rules, there are the three opening chapters of your adventure as a group.
Mm-hmm.
So all three of them will relate to an adventure, something you shared with another character in the group, and you're going to take preferably different characters for each.
Mhm.
and the aspect is something maybe you learned from that, or something you took away from that encounter, and whatever high adventure you had together, so that when you start rolling dice, your characters know one another, and they've got some backstory together, so maybe some friendship or some rivalry.
Mhm.
So that's the key to that group character creation.
It's wonderful and it works so well. And I know I've used that kind of, even with other systems, I've used that sort of concept with creating characters, just because it's just straight away you have an understanding of how you're going to role play and interact with that person. Uh, and yeah, and as you say, it's part of the game. Sitting there and making your character is something you're already playing before you've even started. And you can have really good fun with these aspects for how they kind of work in the game. Because we had do you want to talk about how you tag the aspects a bit more when other people can do that, and how that sort of works in the game?
Well, an aspect is a good aspect is something that is specific enough. It's not too vague. It gives a handle on what your character is like and what is likely to happen to your character,
Mm-hmm.
and ideally something that can be used both for and against the character.
Mm-hmm.
So saying I'm a Venetian merchant.
Yeah.
That's not bad. But if you are an impoverished Venetian merchant, it might be more interesting. It
Yeah.
might have a little more hooks to get you to get those fate points by getting your character in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But it also gives you an advantage. Maybe you will probably know about the value of jewels, or if I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking of a Renaissance setting,
Sure.
or you will have some nautical knowledge. How do ships work, and how long does it take to travel to Constantinople from here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a campaign some of my friends had, which the campaign was like 7 years ago, I think. They still talk about it, and one of the aspects that was used all the time was great. Was one character was playing a very kind of religious character, and one of their aspects was feet first, God will provide.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great. So it meant all the other characters, if there was a situation that was a bit risky that no one else wanted to step into, they go, "Oh, here you go. Feet first, God will provide. There you go. You can go and do that." And so it was great for encouraging role play and the story. So yeah, so that's it. So an aspect like that is really good, so that it's open, but it also meant obviously it tied in with his all his religious knowledge and moments perhaps when their god would provide for them in some situations. So I think aspects are a wonderful way to encourage role play, and it can help you if you're a little unsure of who your character is. You have these kind of cornerstones that, or if I act in this way, I know I'm going in the right direction for my character.
Yeah, what would my character do? And you
Mm-hmm.
don't have to come up with all of them as you start. You
Mm-hmm.
can start gently and add them in play until you filled your complement of 5,
Mm-hmm.
as you discover who your character really is.
Mm-hmm. Um, we've got the character sheet on screen for those watching the live stream. If you're listening to the podcast, you can use theatre of the mind and imagine it. But we have a section of aspects which we talked about, and then maybe perhaps we move on and talk about skills. So we've already talked about kind of the dice and how you would roll to if you're trying to do something, and the pluses and minuses, say how much success you have. How do skills kind of fit into that, and how do people choose them during character gen?
Well, skills come from the more traditional side of gaming. I think
Mm-hmm.
at least that's my opinion.
Sure.
Um, they're fairly familiar. If we have started with DnD and its brethren, we understand what stealth will be like, or
Mm-hmm.
uh, what fighting and so forth.
Yeah.
And so that gives you a numerical value, and in Fate typically they're going to be a little pyramid. That means that You will start with one skill, one high skill at the apex, and then you will have as you go down the value, you will have more skills.
Yeah.
So a smattering of things that you're not great at, but
Hmm.
you dabble and so forth. But they're dangerous too, because if you come from a skill driven game, very often players that are making that switch
Hmm.
will concentrate on skill value and will look at, for example, I need to open a door and I don't have burglary, or
Hmm.
it's low, and so the player becomes disgruntled because I don't have the right skill.
Yeah.
And that is a trap we should avoid.
Hmm.
uh, what I was saying, that the aspects and how you do things are what matters. So
Hmm.
the challenge in Fate should never be, do I have the right skill?
Hmm.
If I need to accomplish this, how am I going to do? What could I do to accomplish it?
Yes.
So, for example, a person who was not good at this sort of thing but had the gift of gab might talk their way into being let in, or into
Yeah.
having somebody else open the door for them. Somebody who was strong might simply break down the door, and
Hmm.
maybe the consequence then would be that they make a lot of noise, or that they can't close the door behind them when somebody pursues them.
Hmm.
Uh, so what's important is how the story goes, but the skills are useful to know what your character does, what's their go-to ability, what are they a specialist in
Hmm.
the Fate Accelerated version, which is a, as the name indicates, a quick pick up and go, learn the system as you play
Yeah.
version that was released at the same time. Instead of having skills, you have what is called approaches. Uh, they go something like careful, clever, forceful, sneaky. There's six of them. Um, and I like them better to introduce people to the system,
Okay.
because they don't say, do I have the skill to do this? What an approach says is, how would I do this? What's
Yeah.
my style when I do this?
Sure.
So it's a good way to get in the spirit of the game.
Yeah, I think for me, because I played Fate so early on with role playing, it really encouraged me to approach role playing generally in the way you just described, of not saying, oh, I have this skill and it's that thing, so it matches, so I'll do that. It's more about, how can I get around this obstacle? And also, what can I convince the person running the game that I can have bonuses for this? I'm like, well, if I do it like this, does it count with this skill because of da da da? And does this aspect kind of fit in there? And da da da. So I think that style of role play is kind of what's informed me for any system I use using this. So I think Fate is an excellent system for any role player to certainly try, because I think not only is it a great system to use for lots of different games, I think it really encourages you to role play in a specific way, that will be helpful for any other role play setting that you have. We're talking through the character sheet a little bit here because I've got it up on the screen, so it makes sense to do that. So I don't know, Sophie, if you could talk us through the other areas on the character sheet we've got here. So we've gone through kind of aspects and skills. Could you talk us through the other pieces that we do when we create a character and play the game?
Well, another important piece of information on your character are the stunts.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have up to three for free when you start a character, typically. But again, they may be things you discover in play. And a stunt is something that gives a special twist to your character, very often centered on a particular skill,
Mm-hmm.
but it will do one of two things. It will give you a little mechanical advantage, usually a +2 to some skill action or approach action in narrow circumstances. So for perhaps it would be a stunt might be, but I am not left-handed, and you might get a +2 to do the first attack against another character with your sword when you suddenly switch hands.
Mm-hmm.
The first
Nice.
time, I would give the first time because
Surprise, yeah.
yes. The other thing that you can have from a stunt is a little rules exception. For
Mm-hmm.
example, being able to use a different skill instead of the one that would be nominally called for. For example, you have say you're playing a big character who is the brute squad,
Mm-hmm.
and you will uh, uh, you will have a good physique in that case, right? Uh,
Hopefully.
and typically, scaring somebody would be a provoke roll, but you
Mm-hmm.
may have a stunt that says that um, you're big and impressive, for example, that would
Mm-hmm.
allow you to use your physique score instead of of provoke, because the way you do it is not through your wits and your personal
Mm-hmm.
ability with words, but it's through being big and scary.
Yeah.
And another type of little rules exception is being able to do something quite out of the ordinary once per maybe per scene or per episode, depending on how potent it is.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, for example, um, once per episode, and because you are the Dread Pirate Roberts, you
Mm-hmm.
can call on some of your sailor minions and they will come to your aid. That's not in the movie.
Fantastic with stunts. Of course, when we're playing Fate, it can be the Fate core system can be any setting you like.
Yes.
So you can play any genre. But let's say we're playing a pirate campaign, like you just said, because that is something I've actually done. We're going to be doing some fighting and things like that. So when kind of bad things happen to our characters, there's like physical stress and mental stress on the sheet and consequences. Could you talk us through how that works when we're playing the game?
So physical and mental stress, and in some variants, in some specific settings, you may also have social stress or other kinds of
Mm-hmm.
stress. But there are ways that you take the hit
Mm-hmm.
when you're in a conflict or when something bad happens, and stress. You have a limited quantity of it, but it will be cleared at the end of the scene. So there. For example, if we look at physical stress,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you may be it's just a scratch, so your character looks battered and bruised as you're marking off the stress you're taking, which are points of damage essentially from your opponent. But it's Hollywood cosmetic, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the
Mm-hmm.
scene, it all comes back. Consequences are another way of taking that damage, but now that stays longer with you. And a
Mm-hmm.
consequence is a little aspect, but it's an aspect that your adversaries invoke against you.
Mm-hmm.
So the a mild one is 2 points, so it will absorb two shifts of damage, um, and we have a moderate at 4 and a severe at 6 points
Mm-hmm.
each. So a mild consequence might be, and for physical, might be a twisted ankle. Um, if for a mental one, it might be befuddled or so,
Mm-hmm.
uh, something that is not too dangerous, too
Sure.
onerous, and then they might increase in if instead it was moderate, if you had to basically take your 4 points through a consequence, it might be fractured femur, or a maybe a bad reputation, or wanted by the
Mm-hmm.
police, and so forth. And the more severe the consequences, the longer it will stay with you. So instead of disappearing at the end of the scene, it will last at least through the episode, and then it can start healing at the next milestone, moving up from one notch. So a severe consequence will stay with you for a long time, because it may
Mm-hmm.
be an entire story arc or two before you can clear it entirely.
Serious stuff then. So I think we talked a lot about the kind of the mechanics of Fate and how that works. But as we said, the whole point of the mechanics in Fate are meant to be that they get out the way so you can focus on role playing and telling your story. So I found it works well as a one shot or as a campaign. So if people were looking at this and looking to try using the Fate system, what advice would you give to players looking to run a game using Fate for the first time?
Start small. Don't feel like you have to include every rule right from the top. You can build to a more complex game. So, for example, the I don't have one in front of me, but the basic rules of Fate
Mm-hmm.
fit on a bookmark. And when I went to convention before, in the before times, I always had a stack of them, and I would give one to every player, because
Mm-hmm.
what you really needed to know on how things work all fit on a bookmark. I've run many games with just that, without having to crack a book open. Um, but for a beginner, starting with reading Fate Accelerated, it's a small
Mm-hmm.
book, it's inexpensive. And by the way, the PDF versions of both, of Fate Core, Fate Accelerated, and the more recent updates, Fate Condensed,
Mm-hmm.
all three of them are available for pay what you want, or including zero. So it's only the physical books you have to pay for. Um, and that
Excellent.
Fate Accelerated, being a slim volume with just the basic rules, is really good to get started and concentrate on what's important
Mm-hmm.
to master the system. And then when you want a GM advice, edge cases, more complex rules for more complex scenes, then you can go to the Fate Core book. You can go to one of the many tool books. We have tool books on a variety of
Mm-hmm.
specific topics.
Yeah. That's great. I've put the link if you're watching live in the chat there, and if you're listening to the podcast, the link is in the show notes where you can take a look at those games there. And as Sophie mentioned, you can pick those up for pay what you feel. So if it's something you're interested in, but cash is an issue right now, you can pick up those versions for what's kind of appropriate for you to pay at the moment. Talking about the Fate Accessibility Toolkit, I do have to say congratulations, because just last week you won the ENnie Awards for that. Could you talk about...
Silver, yeah.
Oh, was it silver? Yeah, you won the
Yeah.
award. That's still an award-winning thing.
Yes,
So congratulations, yeah.
and it had
And
been nominated for last year's Nebula, that we
mhm,
did win this year with the Thirsty Sword Lesbian. So,
uh-huh.
we feel like it's received some recognition.
Yeah, so the could you talk us through what's in the kind of accessibility toolkit and how that works if people are looking to kind of use that for...
The important things oh, I got my image mirrored, huh? You see it backwards. Let's
Oh
see if
no,
I
no,
can.
I can
Okay.
see that. Yeah, it looks good. Yeah.
So it was written by people who had disabilities, and a variety of disabilities that they work with, they deal with. The
Mm-hmm.
creative director was Elsa Sjönesson, who also has received nebulas and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of recognition for her great skill.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it's aimed at, it's got a couple of different targets. One is to make people who deal with disabilities feel more welcome at the table by helping others understand how they can make the game better for everyone involved at the table.
Yeah.
And the other is to make GMs and players, regardless of where they come from and their abilities, uh, become familiar with intelligent and respectful ways to deal
Yeah.
with disabilities in the game.
Mm-hmm.
I think for us who are older gamers and have seen a lot of several systems early on used, for example, physical disabilities automatically as disadvantages, mental disabilities as a system where your character's mental state degrades and keeps getting worse, uh, and mixed and matched illnesses that are not the same, or attributed symptoms that are not
Yeah.
correct. But this lets you look at disability with a different eye, uh, with to see. Sometimes it can be an advantage, whether it's being able to concentrate and focus on something very strongly, being able to pay attention to senses that you might neglect otherwise, having some assistive devices that can be used for more than just getting around or communicating. And it treats of this again as a multi-setting sort of view. So you can think about what would it look like in a cyberpunk setting or in a fantasy setting. We have illustrations of let's see if I can find some of the wheelchairs, for example, that you could get.
Yeah.
You have prosthesis for fantasy and futuristic. And all the
Excellent.
artists were also had various disabilities, so they knew when they were drawing something, they knew exactly what it was. And
Yeah.
like the guy who had a leg prosthesis drew the leg prosthesis. So we were happy because the people who wrote this did a fantastic job. Um, it was a lot of work because that covers a lot of ground.
Yeah. It's such a big area, isn't it? So it's yeah, but
And
it's
the players told us that made them feel seen and that they were taking this to their group to see that's what I'm talking about.
I think it's fantastic to see things like that, because I think everybody likes to see themselves in the game, and they want to feel that the games they're playing are a welcoming and a place that everybody can come and play. And as you say, even for people that don't have any disabilities themselves, perhaps having that is something that's so useful for you to make you think of things you hadn't considered. Because sometimes you don't know something until someone points it out to you, and then you think, oh, of course, so simple, why didn't I should have thought of that. But sometimes it takes something like that for you to just be made aware of something, because it's
Yes.
not your lived experience. Yeah.
And being not having a disability is ultimately a temporary state, isn't it? As we
Oh,
age, we all get there somehow.
if we're lucky to age, yes, that's very true. But yeah, so that's really great to hear. So congratulations on winning the Silver Ennio Award for that. So we're coming up to near the end of the hour. So if you're watching and you have any questions, now is the time to ask them. But Sophie, is there anything you'd like to talk about in the Fate core system that I've forgotten to ask you about, or we forgot to mention, or anything like that that you want to share about Fate?
Well, for game masters, it's a really good tool as well. Uh, it lets you take the ideas that your players throw at you, and even if you haven't the stats for that person. You never thought about that particular character showing up, or that monster showing up, or you don't know how tough the door is here when you try to break it down. You can do it on the fly. You can stat things on the fly. You can stat them very simply. You don't have to have all the skills. You can just have skills like bad at talking to people and good at running away, uh, and give them a numerical value that will be matched with the kind of difficulty your players should get. Write it down, and now you know this about the character. And it's allowed me to take a lot of settings where I loved what the game was built around, but I didn't like the systems they were using. They were not comfortable for me to use as a GM, so I ended up converting those to Fate very, very easily. And not having a whole lot of work as a GM is a good way to be able to
Yes,
do it more often.
definitely. Okay. We have had a question come through. So we have another Dresden fan file clearly here, and they've asked if there are any new Dresden files stuff coming out for Fate.
Well, first, I should clarify that there's the Dresden File RPGs, which is a big full-size trio of books. Is it Your Character, Our World, and Baronet Papers?
Mm-hmm.
And it was an earlier version of Fate. It predates the core issue, and it's got a wealth of material. But in recent years, we released an updated version, the Dresden Files Accelerated, that is a small book, about the same size as this, perhaps a little thicker, and it provides updated characters. It's a lot simpler to make the characters. It's got a very elegant implementation of the Fate rules for it. And as far as we're concerned, that is the current edition of Dresden Files. So if the question is, will something come out for the Dresden Files RPG from, 15 years ago now? The answer is no. But you can use Dresden Files Accelerated to bring them up to date. There is no plan at the moment for anything further because of various logistic reasons, and because we've really piled the material, pretty high. So there's maybe not that much to add to, but I encourage you to try the version that we released earlier this year on Roll20 if you are doing virtual gaming. We gave a lot of tools, including all the characters. So all those characters are there. You can just use them in your game. You don't have to create them, because that's the big challenge in the earlier version. Character creation was more laborious.
Okay, excellent. So I've put the link in the chat, or if you're listening to the podcast, in the show notes there for the Dresden Files Accelerated there on the Evil Hat site, so you can take a look at that. And the links to the Roll20 are on that page as well if you want to check that out. That's all on there for Dresden File fans like myself. I really enjoy the Dresden books you make for Fate, so I think they're fantastic for it. So I'm sure if you're a fan, you will enjoy those. So if you have any other questions but weren't able to ask us today, I'm sure if you go over to Twitter to @EvilHatOfficial, Sophie or one of the rest of the team would be happy to answer your questions about Fate or any of the other books that you have. Sophie, I do have one final question for you that I ask all the guests, and that would be, what RPG recommendations would you have for people that aren't games that you make and that are not Dungeons and Dragons? So what other tabletop RPG systems would you recommend to people to try?
Well, for a first timer, or for someone who has played D&D and is looking to play something else but doesn't know what, I would recommend Fiasco from Bully Pulpit Games.
Yes.
because it's very light. It's a role playing game, a story game, and on the edge of being a board and card game. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it is also a really great way to set up a whole new campaign in any system, because it creates relationships between characters and tensions, and there are a lot of different settings that are available. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that's a good. That would be my go-to for introducing someone.
I think that's a great recommendation. I've got that book myself, and it's great fun as well if you play a lot of role playing games and you're having kind of a bit of a downtime with your friends and
Mhm.
want something to play in between for that as like a one shot situation. So that's a great recommendation. Thank you so much. And Sophie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing Fate with us. We're going to be having Evil Hat back on the show again next month to talk about Thirsty Sword Lesbians, the multi-award winning game with the best title ever. So unsurprising, it's done so well. So we'll certainly be having you back next month in September to talk about that. Next week on Not D&D, we are taking a bit of a gear shift though, where the game we're talking about is going to be called Anamnesis, which is a solo journaling tabletop RPG. And I personally haven't done many solo tabletop RPGs, so this will be really interesting for me to kind of learn more about. And if you also haven't tried them, perhaps come along next week, and that'll be wherever you're watching this, Monday at 10 p.m. BST, or wherever you're listening to this podcast of Not D&D. You can catch up with that next week. But that's all from us this week. So thank you to everyone that came along to watch and to listen. And Sophie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your time with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.